And it's really a thrill to be here. I feel like it's my first time to Tennessee. That's super exciting for me. It's a big excitement for me to do that. And also, as I've been speaking with folks here that I've met just since coming in yesterday, saying that it's really exciting to be in places where I feel like I am absolutely in the learning stage of what you're all up to. And so I think that I had a lot of discussions with everyone here before I decided to come, just about like, wow, like I feel like I don't know much about quant bio, and I feel like I have so much to learn, and so I don't know if I really fit in with this community, but that makes it really exciting for me, because I feel like in getting ready for this, I've learned so much talking with colleagues about quant bio skills and quant bio in our classes, and I feel like I'm really taking a huge learning stance to be with you all here today. So I appreciate all of your expertise that you're sharing with me. And I'll introduce myself just a tad more in a moment, but I never want to go too long without really having you engage a little bit with one another, because I think that the most important people in the room are the people sitting around you, and I'm just here to try to maybe guide some of those discussions in certain directions, so that's kind of my goal today. And so to start us off, I have a challenge statement for us to think about. You may have worked on challenge statements before. And I'll also say, as we get to that challenge statement, that I know that we have a bunch of just fantastic both biology educators and math educators, and some others in the room, and that I'm going to throw out sort of my language, at least use the word quant bio for the kind of stuff that we're working on, quant bio lessons or quant bio activities, with the understanding that these are not just for biology classes, right? That these are also applied mathematics sort of activities. And so applied mathematics or science-based mathematics activities is just very long, and so I'm going to say quant bio, but by that I don't mean to exclude the mathematics folks. I mean that to refer to both types of classes. So here's my challenge statement for you all. Quant bio lessons are a key tool for promoting diversity and inclusion in our classes. So if challenge statement means you get to read it, take an opinion, agree or disagree, I'll say there's no right or wrong answer at all in this. But we'll just take a moment to think about this. So it'll just be quiet for a few seconds here to reread that statement and just think, no right or wrong answers. What's your opinion and why? So just a moment to think. All right, so I hope you had a chance to think there a bit, and I really do mean there's no right or wrong answer. I think that you should feel free to vociferously disagree or agree or whichever way. So take a moment just to turn to one of those fabulous colleagues nearby and chat with them about what opinion did you take, and what were the reasons. Should get very, very noisy as you do that. I got only the briefest of moments to walk around a bit and eavesdrop, and oh my gosh, I heard so many really creative and fantastic ideas. And this is the place where I literally very easily could have walked out of the room for another hour and come back at the end of the hour, and you've been like, wow, what a great discussion that was. Where'd that guy go? And so just proving once again that I'm the least important person here. So you'd have had a fabulous, productive, and really engaging conversation for the next hour if I just left right then. And so I apologize for interrupting that, because I think that could have actually been a really wonderful use of our time. But I just put that there. I put that challenge statement up there because I think that it gets to my goal after this hour that we spend together, that I want to convince you that what you are working on is a key tool for systemic institutional change around equity and inclusion. I'm going to make a very, very strong statement about that. And so it's my job over the next hour to try to convince you of that. And I think I have some data, I think I have some anecdotal experience and other things that will hopefully support that. So that's where we're going. Keep that in mind, hold me to it. Come back, and if I don't convince you of that, challenge me on it, right? But I really want to make that case that the work you're doing is really critical in so many ways, and in many ways that that some folks outside of the room may not even anticipate. So with that said, just a little bit about me. I feel like it's only fair that I say something about myself, but I am at Foothill College. That's some pictures of my campus. It's beautifully situated just barely up in the Santa Cruz Mountains in Silicon Valley. I think I have the best job in the world. I sometimes go places where people are not community college educators, and I'm like, why do you not do what I do? Because I have the best job, and I just don't understand why you don't do what I do. And I'm endlessly inspired by my students. They're the most hardworking people ever. I feel like my goal in life is to, when I grow up, to be like my students, and I don't know that I'll ever quite get there, because they are so hardworking. As much as I try to work hard to match them, I don't think I ever make it there. And so I'm just so deeply appreciative of the job that I have and the students I work with, and inspired every minute by them. So that's a big part of my identity, I think. I also often point out that I was a music major, so this is me as a bachelor. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Saxophone Performance from UCLA, so I have a music major there. That certainly gives me a certain perspective on science and my pathway to science that is, in some ways, a bit non-traditional, but that's one perspective I bring. I'm also originally from the Midwest, so not too far from here, but I'm still a Cubs fan. I'm from the Chicago area, so I just put that up there as a big part of my identity, and much of my family is still there. Probably the main thing that is part of my identity that I bring with me everywhere is the identity as a dad. And so I have a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old, 9.5 and a 4.5 and year-old. And anytime I'm not there, I'm thinking about what they're doing and if they've completely forgotten about me or like what's happening with them. So that's always on my mind and impacting me. And then finally, just in terms of sort of my scientific background, I was/am a marine biologist and mostly studied marine ecology and evolution of fishes. And I worked on the speciation of this particular fish, the diamond turbot, which lives in the Pacific Ocean, and many other things, working on everything from algae to snails to all kinds of different stuff. So that's sort of my background there. However, I no longer publish in the field of marine biology very often. I'm still in touch with some of those colleagues, and I love that work. But these days I publish in the field of science education and biology education research. So this is just a smattering of some of my recent publications. And as Heather mentioned, I'm on the editorial board of the main journal in my field, one of the journals in my field, the Journal of Life Sciences Education. And finally, just wanted to say that the work that I'm talking about today is absolutely not mine and not mine alone. It is the result of a collaboration with many awesome collaborators, many of them community college students or former community college students. So these are some of my colleagues who have either co-authored papers with me on this work or co-presented at conferences with me on this work. And this work would not be what it was without them. And so they are all here in spirit, and they've all contributed immense intellectual efforts and sort of contributions to this. So finally, as we get started, I wanted to just have us think about a little bit of how I came to this particular project. And so I have a brief set of, I think, discussion prompts here to kind of maybe frame this work in terms of how I came to it and why I got really interested in this. And before that, I have to ask, how many people have heard of or engaged with something called the Rock Stars of Science campaign? Somebody? Yeah? Awesome. Couple people? Oh, great. All right, so you're in for a treat then, if you haven't. If you've seen it before, then there's all kinds of new revelations you can have, but if you haven't, you're in for a treat. So just a little bit of background. The Rock Stars of Science campaign is a philanthropic effort run by the Jeffrey Bean Company, which is a clothing company, and GQ Magazine. And these organizations, their philanthropic arms, good for them, decided that they were really enthusiastic about getting young people excited about science. So, maybe not an obvious choice for a clothing company and a men's magazine publisher, but that's what they decided they want to do, and good for them, right? So their theory of action then in this was that they would take scientists and put them next to rock stars, take pictures of them, and then publish those in GQ Magazine, because we know that's where all the young people go for their information, GQ Magazine, right? And also on billboards, but like literally, you can go to Minneapolis Airport sometimes, you'll see there's these billboards of rock stars of science there, so there are other places too. And I'm just going to show you some examples. So here are a couple examples from their original campaign of rock stars in science. And these are going to come back in just a moment, so don't worry, you'll see them again. I'm just going to flip through a few of them for now. Here's a couple more examples of rock stars of science pictures from their campaign. And this will come back in a moment as well. And then here's the final one from their initial campaign, which is 2009. They have other campaigns since then. And what I wanted to do is to just get us kind of framed around, my mindset around this work, I think, was to take a look at these pictures. I'm going to put them all up in a second. And there's going to be a couple prompts for you to think about. One, it's just an observation, sort of like the graph, right? What do you notice about the photographs from the Rock Stars of Science campaign? There's no right thing to notice. There's no wrong thing to notice, right? Just what do you notice? And then thinking about their goal with these, what messages might these images send to young people? And again, no right or wrong answers, right? I've used these images in hundreds, literally, of groups of individuals, and there's always different things that come out, so there's no right or wrong thing. But what do you notice, and what messages might these send? So I'm going to put all those pictures back up now, and again, we'll just take a moment, 30 seconds or so, it'll be quiet, and you can just kind of think to yourself here. All right, and I thank you for that think time. I'll say that I'm one of these people that, like, if I'm just told to discuss something, I'm like paralyzed and I won't speak up. And so I need a moment to process and think, and like rehearse my ideas before I can actually converse. But now why don't you go ahead and turn to those colleagues again. And again, no right or wrong answers, just see what different observations you have or different sort of messages being sent. You should get very noisy as you do that. All right, and once again, I think I'll bring us together. Thanks for working with your colleagues. Another time where I very easily could have left the room and it would have been great discussion to continue. In this case, I don't always do a lot of sort of group shares in my classroom for various reasons, but I'd just love to hear a few ideas. So maybe I'll get 4 hands to start. So if you could raise your hand, I'll wait till I get 4, and then we'll kind of go around and just get a few ideas. And again, no right or wrong ideas, right? Oh, well, that was very fast. See, I should have asked for more. In my class, I might have to wait for a few seconds for that to happen. So let's show me your hands again, those folks. And I think I saw your hand too, Amy, right? So I'm going to try to keep track here. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think, total, right? Something like that. So I'll try to make my round to all those 5. That sounds great. And so maybe I'll kind of loop around this way. So Greg, please share with your colleagues.
My first thought was the rock star scientist.
Uh-huh.
When I looked at the first glance, and I realized some of them were holding instruments. And talking with Adam, he said some of them are scientists who are holding the instruments. I only recognize 2 or 3 people up there, and one of them I don't even know their name. I couldn't remember the name, but it stood out as very diverse.
Yeah.
That's across the limited people of color. I mean, it just looks like they all belong to that.
Yeah, and so I think you bring up a good point that their theory of action is compromised a bit if you don't know who the rock stars and scientists are. And so maybe we can just clarify here. Does anybody know any of the rock stars up here? Yeah, just some names here. Joe Perry, right here. Sheryl Crow. Seal, over here. Will.i.am, up here. Josh Groban, yeah. So there's one rock star in each picture, yeah. So maybe that helps, but I totally agree. Even the individuals they chose, I'm not sure are that relevant to young people, right? This seems to be folks that maybe I might recognize, but not necessarily my students, yeah. Thank you.
If they're trying to break down stereotypes of what it is to be a scientist, they fail.
Well, elaborate. So it appears to you that so if you are able to figure out who's a scientist, then it appears to you that those individuals seem to be presenting as white men. Yeah, thank you. Old white men, thank you, thank you. I didn't catch that part. They appear to be older white men, yes. And then I was coming over here, and so you're gonna have to help me out. Who is my next person over here? So, was it? Oh, Jill, yeah.
Sorry, actually, I guess our comments have already been made. We also did not all know who the scientists were versus the rock stars, and we thought it was also interesting that there wasn't a lot to tell you that, like, had you not told me ahead of time that it was rock stars and scientists, I would not have actually known that there were scientists in the pictures. So I'm not sure, again, that it really gets at that idea, whatever it is that they're trying to convey,
Right.
that it's cool to be a scientist and to be whatever happens to me.
Right.
Because had I not known that, I would have been.
Right. Yeah, not a lot of context for these pictures and might not get to their point. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
I think it's the purpose of this slide to promote science among women.
Uh-huh. So in particular, you think that if this was to promote science or increase enthusiasm for science among women, that in your impression, this does not meet that goal. It does not meet that. Yeah. Yeah, or getting to the point that Amy was saying about the perceived ages and races of these individuals. Why not an attention to representation there as well? Yeah.
So I've seen these at many airports.
Yeah.
And they do have a very small print telling you who people are on them. And there is a very, very strong tilt towards biomedical science. So on the lower right there is Anthony Fauci, who was just castigated by the Trump administration for being honest about coronavirus, and I was told is now not allowed to say anything unless it's vetted through the White House.
Yeah, so it's true, and so it is more biomedical. This is Francis Collins, head of the NIH, and so these are all biomedical researchers in these pictures, absolutely. Well, thank you. And again, I've heard like all sorts of observations made on these. But maybe I'll just bring out one other perspective, since, to my knowledge, we don't have students in the room. And so I will bring out one student perspective when we were working with these same images with student as well. But there are 11 scientists featured. That is just a fact. That they had 11 scientists. All 11 do appear to be men. All 11 do seem to be white. And for one perspective from a student saying, it kind of says that women and people of color are more likely to be rock stars than scientists, from an undergraduate woman of color. And so a case where really, I mean, honestly, a very well-intentioned campaign. My colleagues have actually talked to the people who run this campaign, and they're incredibly well-intentioned. They really, really want to increase enthusiasm for science. That is really their goal. So these are not, overtly terrible people, I think. But in spite of those good intentions, their work in many ways is actually potentially counteracting their goal. So really well-intentioned effort that just really did not necessarily do what they hoped it would do in this case. And so this just leads me to say that there's the messaging about the types of people that can do science, or really any field, not just science, can impact student interest, persistence, and success. That we are surrounded by messaging regarding who can do science. Even if you or your students have never seen Rockstars of Science before, they're certainly exposed to, on a daily basis, information and messaging about who does different kinds of things in the world, from just the world around them, from popular culture, from media, all kinds of places, right? And I think that the thing that really impressed this importance of this around me, was really referring to the literature, that there's an incredible depth of literature around stereotype threat and science identity and possible selves and other areas, suggesting that this message has broad impacts, not even just on interest, for example, in a field amongst different individuals, but actually on learning the material. And I think this is where my mind was really blown, and really, I really started to think about this really deeply, was that like, if I care about biology, then I need to attend to these issues if I want my students to learn biology. Because you learn more biology in a situation where you feel like you and people like you belong there and are represented there. And that is told by everyone's lived experiences, but also by the actual research literature. So this brings me to a question that I had for myself, and I just want to throw it to you for a question for you as well, which is about this messaging in our courses. So I started to ask myself this question. I'm curious what you'd say. So what, if any, specific examples of individuals in your field do students typically encounter in your course? So in our cases, that may be biologists, maybe mathematicians, whatever your field might be. To what extent are they in your course? And what messages might those examples convey to students? So just again, a moment to think. It'll just be quiet for a bit. All right, and in lieu of sharing this time, I'm actually just going to share my response, because I care deeply about this for a long time, of course, because of who my students are and how much I admire them. And then being exposed to the research literature around it just made me realize how even more critical it was than I even realized before. And so I started reflecting on these questions in my own class. And my answer to these questions was not at all. That there was really no messaging in my class about who does my field. And there were no examples of scientists that related to my field at all. Except for maybe one, which was potentially me. And so I very clearly identify as a scientist with my students, and I feel like a science person, and I think that gets conveyed to my students. And so I was the real one explicit representation of who does science in my classroom. And frankly, that troubled me more, because everything that I was reading was saying that really, I may not be the best example to be that person. I may not be that different from rock stars of science, I think, for my students in many ways. And so here I was with my series of identities as a white, cisgender man, heterosexual, non-first generation student, able-bodied individual, non-veteran, in front of a group of students, none of whom share those exact sets of identities, none. and that made me deeply concerned. It honestly, to this day, makes me wonder if I really should be a community college educator. And That's, for me, a very unsettled question. I can make a very strong argument that I should not be. And so it's something I think about very deeply all the time. Yet I have not run out of my classroom screaming yet. I'm still there. I still love my work. I still love my students. And so while I'm there, I realized that I wanted to have some way of changing that dynamic and changing the way that scientists were represented. And I want to say that this is where I think, and I want you to start thinking critically too, that quant bio curricula can address this. Because I'm going to make the case, in my case, that I decided to address this through curriculum. That I see curriculum as a really, really strong and powerful institutional structure in education. That curriculum drives what happens in our classroom, how it happens, how we structure the class. And so to the extent that we can address equity inclusion directly and seamlessly and authentically in the curriculum, we can drive some really important institutional change in our classrooms and across our fields about equity inclusion, because curriculum is such a powerful tool. And you all are at that interface of developing and working on curricula. And so this is a place where you have tremendous power, and tremendous power to work on lots of things, including equity inclusion. So how did I do this, and how might this translate to some of those stuff you're working on? Well, I'm going to talk about one method of challenging stereotypes through inclusive curricula. You will receive in just a moment one example of a Scientist Spotlight homework assignment. And so I'd like you to take some time to look through the assignment, engage with the materials. It'll be sort of like an assignment page, and then you'll see the assignment has links on it. And you're not going to click on links today, but I just printed out those links, so it's actually printed behind it, so you can flip back and see those things. And there's actually 2 different resources behind the assignment page. And I'd like you to just engage with it. You could engage with it like a student, sort of think about like if you were doing this as a student. But you can also have the other hat on as sort of a professor, right? And think a little bit about what does it appear students would be doing, and what do you think students might learn about as a result of this? So I'm going to pass some of these down your rows. I'll probably just go down the center here, and I'm not counting very well, so please let me know if I don't get quite the right number in each row, and I'll come around and fill that out. But please take one of these for yourself and pass along the others down to your colleagues. And I'll get a couple up here. Go to your colleague there. And I imagine we'll end up with some extras in some rows and not enough in other rows, so let me know how we're doing there. You all are so nice. You just worked it out. You worked out all the numbers. I love that. All right, so it'll probably actually be quiet for a moment because you're just going to do some reading, right? So pretend that you just got this assignment. You could pretend you're a student, right? And what's going to happen? So go ahead and engage with the materials. Feel free to answer the questions if you like. There's some questions on the first page, but whatever is best for your time, a couple of minutes here to experience these materials. Right, and so I'll say there are 2 different examples here. There's one on Brent Allman and one on Dr. Margaret Okomo-Adiambo. And you can see we actually have an automated form that kind of puts these together for us, since there's a typo in Dr. Okomo-Adiambo's one where it says Brent Allman there, so we're still working out our technical stuff. But what I want to do is give you a chance to share a little bit about each of them, so there should be somebody around you that has the other one that was not yours. And so just a couple minutes a person to you can even hold up your spotlight, kind of flip through it, show them what was there, and any impressions on kind of what you think students would be doing or learning about if they're doing this assignment. And I'll say that in preparation for this, I tried to choose a couple that I thought touched on quant bio skills. So you can tell me that they actually don't, because I'm new to this community. but I tried to choose a couple that arguably touch on quant bio skills. So please find somebody around you that has a different scientist spotlight than you, and just take a couple minutes per person to share what yours was and what's going on in it. All right, and I think I'll bring us back together. Thanks so much for engaging with your colleagues and sharing a bit there. And both of these examples and others will be electronically available should your team leaders here wish to send them out. I'm happy to make everything electronically available to you all. But I wanted to share a little bit about what I think is happening. You can tell me later if you see different things going on, but at least a few of the characteristics of what a scientist spotlight might be that are maybe reflected in some of these things. So for me, I love biology. I'm sure you all love biology and math and the topics that you teach in. So I want my students to learn biology and to be excited about biology. And so this includes course content. Like there's course content in here to me that they're learning about something that we're going to study in class. And that is then in place of a textbook reading or a homework assignment. It's preparing them to study something in class, maybe actually from one of these research articles that's referenced, that becomes the lecture, that we talk about that research article instead of that subsection of the textbook or something, right? So this is absolutely in the service of covering course content. This is not an extra thing I have to squeeze into my course. Quite to the contrary, it helps me cover that course content and check off things that I need to get through in my long list of anatomy and physiology that I'm teaching, which is my main field that I teach in. However, alongside that, there's some introduction to biographical information about someone who might be considered counter-stereotypical. There's at least an argument that some of these folks might be counter-stereotypical. In terms of some of the logistics, this is performed outside of class. In my campus, this is on Canvas, like our course management system. It's graded only for timeliness and word count. So you get it in and you write vaguely to the prompts for a couple hundred words, then you're all good. Prepares us for class, so we can have some of those discussions in class as well. And one thing that's common is that it specifically asks folks to think about the types of people that do science. And I think that's question 4 on both of them. So questions 1 through 3 can vary a little bit, especially there's one of the questions that really relates to content there. So that differs between Dr. Allman and Dr. Oma Akiambo. But all the other questions are sort of similar, and the one that's always there is thinking about the types of people that do science and how that might relate to these assignments. And of course, students can write on any one of those. It says, you might wish to discuss some of the following, so it doesn't mean that you have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, but that option is there as one of the things that the students are focused on thinking about. And since I don't have my students here to directly convey their voices and contribute to this conversation, I wanted to just provide a few examples, really representative and actually common examples of how some students have responded to these. So I have a couple student voices here, just direct quotes from submissions of these homework assignments. So here's one. For me, science has always been intimidating and unapproachable. Listening to Megan describe her personal and professional struggles, frustrations, setbacks, self-doubt, and success in relation to science made it feel very relatable and relevant. Her story humanized scientists to me. I've always thought of scientists as these brilliant, successful people who have vast knowledge, have it all together, and change the world. What Megan showed me is that scientists are absolutely brilliant, successful people who have vast knowledge and change the world, but they don't have it all together. Is that right? Is that true? They stumble, they fail, they struggle. They also do not give up. Megan's story points to the perseverance, resilience, and persistence of scientists. That is beyond admirable. Or another student here. I was pleasantly surprised that this week's spotlight was about a queer female scientist, and the large part of the first resource was about her home life and how being a scientist can be difficult outside the lab. I appreciate the addition to diversity in the scientists that we have now studied, and was happy for the chance to identify with this scientist. I have never learned about a queer female scientist in my studies, although I logically know they must exist. Or you just have to indulge me. I love my students. I always have to have student voices present. Wow, the article on Dr. Lopez and how she got to where she is today is truly inspiring to myself. It reminds me so much of my grandparents and how many non-US citizens deal with so much stigma and profiling and doubt, but continue to keep their head down and charging forward to break barriers and make something out of themselves. Or one last one. I can definitely relate to this scientist's path to success. I have been told that only those affluent with the connections can make it in science. I was even advised by a school counselor that I would never get far in my life due to my need to work to support me and my mom. Though those words are discouraging, we need to cry it out, yell out loud, and get ourselves back together to keep on fighting. And these were the types of things that I was seeing in these responses, not here and there, but in my lecture of 70 or so students, like click, 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 one after another, all of them like this. And it really made me, it really took me aback, because I thought that these scientists were very engaging. I didn't quite realize the level of effusiveness and the level of reflection and how impactful my students seemed to be by this. And so that really led to the work that I did with my colleagues that were referenced earlier to try to figure out what's going on with this. And so we did a variety of things to try to better understand really what the impacts of these interventions were. And I'll just briefly show you one result, and then we'll kind of move along and you can start to think about this for your own context. But one of the things that we did was we had some essay prompts that we used. And so we asked them, based on what you know now, describe the types of people that do science, and if possible, refer to specific scientists and what they tell you about the types of people that do science. Back then, for this original paper, we analyzed basically first day of the course, beginning of course, and last day of the course, essays, from 338 students who completed weekly scientist spotlights, and 126 students in classes that were same instructor, same curriculum, same tests, same quizzes, same labs, all that kind of stuff. But they had just assignments that were exactly the same in terms of the content, but without the biographical information. Just pull out the biographical information. And we also surveyed students 6 months later after class because we saw some trends that we wanted to see if they were longitudinal. And so I wanted to show you just some examples of, you saw some sort of individual examples of student writing about this, but this is really more systematic data, right? And I'm going to show it to you in the form of word clouds. And so this is a word cloud here where the sizes of the words are bigger based on the prevalence of those terms or themes in the data that we collected. So this is from the first day of course. The size of these words reflect the prevalence of the themes on the first day of course essays. And then I don't have a lot of room on the slide, so this is actually 6 months later. So the end of course is skipped here. This is 6 months later, those same students, exact same students. And this was for students that actually did the scientist spotlights, in this case weekly scientist spotlights. And we also have data for the control students too. But maybe just a moment to kind of look at it. There's always a lot to look at word cloud. So just a moment to kind of look up there and see what you think, or see what kind of falls out to you in terms of what students are talking about in terms of who does science. So just be quiet for a moment. All right, and out of respect for the agenda of your day and timing and everything, maybe just turn to a buddy and just share one main observation each, right? So one observation each should be 15, 30 seconds max per person, right? Teams of 3, that's fine, 30 seconds still per person. So it should get very noisy, one observation. All right, I know that was very short, but thanks for at least sharing a brief idea with one another. I think that when we've discussed these in the past, we certainly see that these word clouds appear to be different, and I'll show you in a moment that we can actually quantify that and really do some analyses on that. But there's quite a lot of differences between these two. There's some perplexing things in both of them, but some intriguing differences as well. I always joke that, like, it seems that especially intelligent has gone away, so we've successfully convinced our students that scientists are not intelligent. So. Yes. Of course, I joke about that, but like if you look at these scientists, they're clearly brilliant, right? I mean, there's nothing to suggest that these folks are not really brilliant. And we saw like smart came up in one of the student quotes that we just read earlier. So I don't think that we're actually doing that. But my social science colleagues are actually highly encouraged by that because of the amount of baggage around that word intelligence, especially in our culture. And so there's a lot of sort of implications that intelligence is fixed, that intelligence is sort of innate, and that either you have it or you don't. And that whether you have it or you don't is not equally distributed amongst our society. And so all of those are false, right? All of those are incorrect ideas, misconceptions, but that is a common thing. And so seeing that idea of intelligence being so prominent, to see that become less prominent, many of my colleagues are really quite encouraged by that, actually. So as I said, we can quantify this, so we can refer to the literature and see what a common stereotype versus not a stereotype is. So these are actually the same data you just looked at in a way. Here's the beginning of class essays, the number of non-stereotypes or counter-stereotypes as a proportion of students' responses. Here's the end of the course, last day of course, and here's 6 months later. And so we see that there's this huge shift, obviously statistically detectable shift, that then is maintained actually 6 months after course, which in the life of a community college student is a lifetime. What can happen in 6 months in the life of a community college student? I mean, like, for me, anything that sustains 6 months after a course is quite remarkable. I was pretty surprised by these data. So again, we can just kind of quantify what we saw. And then if you remember back to where we started, I was saying that, I think that all of us care deeply that our students feel a sense of belonging in our class and feel like they are included and that they're represented. And in addition to that, if we care about our content, that there's evidence that sense of belonging and that sense of safety in a classroom relates to learning our content. And so we were curious in our study too, since we had these two groups, and of course we could look at the control group for this, which just stays the same, so that's not very exciting data. But if we have these two groups, these control group and the scientist spotlight group, we could ask that question, well, do we see any evidence that the students doing this work are actually learning more biology? And my prediction was very strong. I was like, well, I mean, that's a lovely idea, but it's not going to happen. Because this is just a homework assignment. It's a small part of the course. It's not worth that many points. It's something that just kind of happens tangentially off to the side. We're clearly not going to see a signal there. And as is always the case in science, I'm wrong. And so here's looking at just course grade as one metric where we have the control students and the spotlight students, and we see that controlling for a variety of factors and trying to adjust, these are actually not raw means, these are adjusted means based on trying to to control for various differences between the course sections. But even controlling for all those things, which narrows this difference, we still get a very distinct difference in terms of what appears to be the way that these students are performing on exams, on lab tests, on lab reports, all these kinds of things, right? With the real one notable difference between these courses only being those scientist spotlights. Of course, there's lots of other differences that we try to control for, but again, same tests, same labs, same curriculum, same instructor, same times of the day of class, all this kind of stuff, right? And we still see this difference. And so that was really intriguing to me. And I still have lots of questions about this. I look at this graph and I'm like, really? Like, wow, like that's really striking to me. And but it's certainly not discouraging data. It's certainly something that seems encouraging. So I'll say that this article was published in an open access journal, so it's open to anyone. It's really nice right now because up until now, you can still just type into Google scientist spotlights, and the very first link is the article. So you don't actually even have to write down the title or anything. All you do is go into Google and type scientist spotlights and click on the first link, and that's the open access version of the article that you can see. There you can see we looked at lots of other stuff. There's other essay prompts that we looked at. There's lots of other student examples of quotes of what students wrote. So if you want to see some more engaging and interesting quotes, you can see those there. But that's certainly open to all of you and certainly something you're welcome to reference. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about kind of where this project has gone since 2016, since this article is published. It's been replicated in some other contexts. So these data have actually been replicated in some very different contexts to mine. So I teach at a really quite diverse community college. These results have now been replicated at places like University of Minnesota. Very different environment. So predominantly white institution, R1, large institution. They found the exact same trends, showing that even with a very different population of students, they still get these big shifts. They still see the benefit for all students, not just students like mine. So there's been some intriguing things going on there. That's some other people's work that's not even mine, led by Sohoya Kotner and Sissy Ballin and others. But then my colleagues and I have also sort of pushed this forward in various ways with what we're now calling the Scientist Spotlights Initiative. And this is where we're now engaging undergrads in service learning courses that I'm teaching right now. I have to go on Monday as my next meeting for this class, to create new Scientist Spotlights matching diverse content areas. Because, my goodness, should I be the one deciding who we feature in classes in terms of scientists? I'm the last person who should decide that, right? My students should be deciding the types of people they would like to see featured in their classes. And so now the power and agency is in their hands to make those decisions and to impact and affect change around this nationwide through their voices and through their ideas. And you see an example of that with Dr. Okomo Adiambo, where at the bottom there's actually a little bio of the student who created that. So the Brent Allman one is one I created, so that's why there's no bio, because it's just me. But the other example that you have was created by a student, so at the bottom you actually see the student's bio where she explains why she chose that person, like why did she want to feature this individual. And so going forward, they're going to actually also have a little student bio, an author bio on them that says why that person was chosen. And frankly, I think those bios are as engaging and awesome as anything. They're great. We're also developing, and this is really close. I've been saying under construction for like years, and it's getting really annoying, but we're very close to this live website that will eventually have a searchable repository for scientist spotlights, where, again, it's probably more relevant immediately to biology folks, but you could type in something like microbiology, and then you would get a series of assignments ready-made that you could plug into your course management system that were developed by students mostly. And so that's coming very soon. I actually have mock-ups of how it's going to look and the arrangement and everything. We're just going through the development process right now. And then, of course, we're going to continue developing and modifying these things and assessing them in a variety of contexts, including at other educational levels besides just university and college level. So I wanted to mostly, I guess, sort of begin to wrap up here. I'll say that I did put just an index card around, so there should be a stack of index cards at each of your tables if you could kind of pass those down. Because we'll have some time for some questions and stuff, but before we do that, it's really helpful for me to think a bit first when I'm going to engage or ask some questions or be skeptical and critical, as I hope you will be with me. But I was hoping just anonymously on those index cards, as we're kind of beginning to wrap up our time together, you could just write down, what is the most important idea you're taking away from our time together this morning? And that could be something based on a discussion you had that had nothing to do with what I was doing, right? Or it could be something that was part of my slides or part of the agenda. But whatever it is, just think for a moment. What's the most important thing you might take away? And then write that down for me. No name required. No, anonymously is fine. So just be quiet for a moment. And let me know if you need more index cards. Anybody else need one? You need a couple more here? Oh, there you go. Oh, just... So just a moment to reflect. So maybe just wrap up a thought, and I appreciate your efforts on that. Not only does this get me some really important feedback, but I think that I just know, even from working with students, that a moment to reflect is really important, and that aspect of reflection and metacognition is really helpful for us to kind of think about things going forward. So I appreciate you doing that. And I'll close by saying that my email address is on everything here, so you can always reach out to me. So it's actually it's in the footer of the document that I just handed out to you all. I also have business cards if you want here to contact me as well, and so I'm happy to share those with you. But you have my contact info through the worksheets you already have there. I'll also say that I now have colleagues who are doing chemist spotlights, who are not just biology, right? Who are doing psychologist spotlights. So I have psychology folks in those fields doing that. Social scientist spotlights, mathematician spotlights. There's an amazing book. I'm forgetting the title right now. Many people in this room might know it, but there's an amazing open access book that actually just has story after story after story of non-traditional paths to math and like struggles to overcome math. And I could find it from my mathematician colleagues, but it's just a fabulous resource and really poignant stories about people kind of grappling with math and their math identity, which are opportunities to feature individuals that have a maybe non-traditional pathway to understanding math. So this is not limited to biology by any means, and it's being used, I think, really beautifully in other contexts. So with that, I'll say thank you so much for spending your time with me this morning, and I can't wait to see how you change the world with inclusive quant bio lessons, hopefully. In many ways you can do that. So I'm happy to answer questions or during the break or whatever, but I just, again, it's just such a treat to be here and to learn from you all, so thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So the question was that we have these service learning courses now, both at Foothill College and then my partner, Kimberly Tanner at San Francisco State. She's the other PI on this grant. She also has a service learning course at San Francisco State where our students are developing these. But on the website, and I could show you later or sometime, a screenshot of what the website will look like. There's a link for like participating and contributing, and there what you get is this forum that I was talking about, because we're working on really sort of streamlining the process of submitting spotlights through a forum, so you can easily know what goes into a spotlight and what to include. And it's pretty self-explanatory at that point, and so that would be open to anybody. And so a faculty member at a different institution could submit a spotlight for someone, or a student from a different institution could submit a spotlight for someone. And yeah, absolutely. Like we're also collecting data around the impacts on students of doing stuff like that, and it appears students have really big shifts in mindsets about themselves and their own perceptions of their leadership in this area by participating and submitting to a national database like this. So yeah, absolutely, we'd welcome contributions from others. Sure, yeah, absolutely.
How many of these bio spotlights do you use in your class?
Yeah, so the question was, how many of these bio spotlights do I use? And so you saw up there, I had weekly ones. I'm on the quarter system, so we have an 11-week quarter. We can't have one do the first week because I haven't met my students yet, right? But starting the second week, so that means I have 10 of them. And that was because after I started getting responses like that, again, like click, 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 over and over and over and over and over, all these responses being so poignant and so effusive, I went away that summer and I'm like, I don't feel like I have an excuse not to do this every week. Like I feel like my students are telling me I need to do this every week. And so I actually decided like, that's just what I'm going to do. And that's what the study was based on, was weekly ones. So for me, 10. I have very little evidence that it has to be 10, though. In fact, I have plenty of evidence from some other people's courses that many fewer is really quite impactful. And so I think that, I have colleagues who've done it like 3 times during a quarter, and maybe each of those 3 times they give a couple options for students. So like, it's just not one scientist they could choose at that point. And again, the data coming out of those classes looks really quite promising. So I don't think that weekly or all the time is at all necessary. I think obviously we'd want to do it enough so that there's some diversity in the individuals that we showcase, right? So if it's just one time, then you only can have one shot at different axes of diversity to showcase. But certainly it doesn't have to be weekly, yeah.
So I'll just comment on a somewhat alternative lower energy approach, which I've used is, and this is particularly in a lower division math for the life sciences entry level course, in which at the beginning of each session, I would throw up very quickly a paper, usually with a graph, that corresponds to something that's on the topic of that day, and throw up just pictures of the authors of that particular paper. And if you're using recent ones, then you're not going to see the classic, old fart male guys like me necessarily relative to what you'll see in the textbook. So.
Yeah. So the comment was that one possible alternative is that that it could be featured as part of an in-class activity where there's a research finding or a graph or whatever it is by a particular scientist, and then that scientist is featured in terms of their picture or something about them. And I think that's fantastic. I think that's a great way to get ideas in. I think that based on this paper, actually, I'd really encourage after that there be some reflective piece about, like, what did this tell you? Like, what did you learn from this? Or, like, what did you take away in terms of the types of people that do science? Because I'll say one interesting thing about our control class was that it was essentially, again, the same class, but with the biographical info removed. So maybe you just look at the scientific info or the research paper info, and that was the only homework assignment. But in those classes, during class, there was some of that happening. So we actually document this in the paper. There were at least 4 times during that class where an individual was showcased in terms of their picture, talking about their important contributions, a counter-stereotypical individual. And I think 2 of those cases was actually watching a video by that person where they were talking about their background and how they came to science. And we detected, I mean, this is again just one study, but we detected absolutely no shift in their thinking about scientists after those. And so here's actually some of those data. So this is looking at, again, the number of raw stereotypes, percent of non-stereotypes per essay, so counter-stereotypes that people wrote about. And this is the class that you looked at. We went from about 18% to more than half of the comments were non-stereotypes. Here's the control class where we featured pictures and videos of individuals in class. We went from 13% non-stereotypes down to 9% non-stereotypes after class. So that was not a significant decrease, but it was no change. And so I think that this was a really intriguing finding to us, because we thought we'd see just a littler change, right? We thought we'd see like a big change here with the scientist spotlights, and just a littler change with our course where we were just featuring in class. And so again, well, I mean, I in no way want to discourage people to feature pictures in class, but we at least have some systematic evidence that shows that in this context, that actually did not change people's minds. And so that was really intriguing to us. But I think this is just my guess, I think maybe it would help to if they were asked to reflect on that afterwards, right? So if a picture shows up and then we fly by and go straight back into mitosis, I'm not sure that there's ever really that processing time to change ideas. If a picture and a story shows up and then there's time to like chat about it and think about it and like, oh yeah, wow, that is pretty different and that does relate more to me or something, maybe we would get some of these shifts, right?
I think that's what I appreciate the most, the narrative factor puts the story behind the face, so it's not just a skin color differential or
Yeah.
gender difference, or the narrative, the rich narrative that goes with that, the non-science portions of the narrative in particular.
Right.
It reminds them that these are human beings with human foibles, human stumbling blocks that they've overcome.
Yeah.
Rather than it just being about the work they did and where they went to school. It's so common for scientists to introduce themselves as where they went to school and the work they did.
Yeah. Yeah, so the humanizing and yeah, certainly even in the ways we introduce ourselves to our class. I mean, I have a colleague, Sarah Brownell, who's studying like how instructors introduce themselves, not even just other scientists, but themselves, and how vulnerable we are about our identities. Because I have identities that are not immediately apparent to me that are non-traditional identities, beyond even just the music major thing, right? And so, and like to what extent do I open up about that and be vulnerable and introduce that versus worry about like losing my status with students somehow, right? And so there's navigation there. But yeah, the humanization piece, absolutely, and like you say, not always just like based on race or nationality or sexual orientation or whatever, though all of those axes are super important. The thing is, what we know about identity is that you can't always predict what part of somebody's identity is resonating with them that day, right? And so, like, I have lots of evidence of, for example, undocumented Latino women who are relating really strongly to white men scientists that we feature, right? For various aspects of their background that actually mesh and connect. And so, we have to try not to make assumptions about which pieces of somebody's, what somebody's identities are, for one thing, because the way that somebody looks may not actually be the way that they identify, right? But then even beyond that, which of their identities are resonating with them? And so the piece of just humanizing scientists at all is really critical. And then attending to some level of diversity within that humanization so that we do have multiple axes on which students can react and interact. So So anyway, I just think that there's endless opportunity with what you're doing to not only be trailblazers in quant bio in mathematics and bio classes, but to actually be trailblazers in changing the systems and institutions around equity and inclusion through this exact work you're doing. So I'll be so intrigued to hear how that resonates with you and how that does or does not become reflected in the types of lessons and curricula that you all develop. But I'm deeply admiring the work you're doing, and I think it's really important, so I'm just super excited to be here. So thanks again.